First of all, perhaps we should throw out some general comments. This is not meant as a criticism, and it's not meant as a defense. It's just a statement about the situation. Poorly understood disorders can be fascinating and challenging, like I already said. They can also cause some frustration. There can be few physicians so dedicated to their art that they do not experience a slight decline in spirits on learning that their patient's complaint is of dizziness. That's just human nature, if you ask me. This frequently means that after exhaustive inquiry, it will still not be entirely clear what it is that the patient feels wrong, and even less so, why he feels it. Dr. Matthews was an eminent British neurologist. Notice his choice of words. He used the word feels. And we're going to talk about this a lot more later. So in other words, he's given justification right off the bat. You can feel pretty rotten without looking all that bad. So let's start from the beginning. If I'm not feeling well, I'm going to go to the doctor. If it's affecting my daily routine and my daily life and my daily social activities, I'm definitely going to go to the doctor. Especially if I'm waited and waited, like the internet says, well, it should gradually get better, and it hasn't gotten better. I have no idea what's wrong, but at least the doctor, I'll go to the doctor, at least the doctor will be able to find out what's wrong, and then we can start treating it. So, I was good, I had all my connections, I got an appointment with Dr. Longridge. This was great. He operated on one of my friends and fixed them. They were just great. So now, and everybody else tells me how good he is. So, I was sent to see him. He was really nice. He talked to me for a long, long time. My actual examination didn't take very long. It took about 2 minutes examining me. He told me my ears look lovely. Oh, ears look great. My hearing's good. And he needed some more information. Don't worry, it's probably not a brain tumor. I don't think you've got a brain tumor, but we need some more information. So he said he's going to send me for some tests. So I got some information, and I'm going to go for some tests. Hey, but wait a minute. He's a specialist. He's a surgeon. He's a really good surgeon. How come he spent the whole time almost just sitting, talking to me, and then just sending me for some tests? Well, I was just wondering, why did Dr. Longridge say I look so good? Why did he send me for some tests if he said I look so good? Did he just want to get me out of the office because it was Friday afternoon? Can these tests add anything to the picture? Do they really need to be done? Okay, I'll go through them. So I'll go for the tests. He explained everything. It was really good. He told me these tests were important. He did some strange things to me. He measured my eyes a lot and made me feel funny. And he said sorry a lot as well. He told me all the tests were normal. My God, what am I going to do now? Nobody will believe me. Honest, Dr. Longridge, there's something wrong, I'm sure. All my family, all my friends are waiting for the results of the tests. They're all normal. And I just don't feel well. I'm sure Dr. Longridge will think I'm crazy. My partner thinks I'm lazy because I don't like going for walks anymore, and I don't go grocery shopping anymore. More about that later. But I'm not making this up. So for the people who've had these thoughts, and you see some of you have probably had these thoughts and been through this scenario, this talk is for you and also for all the other people in your life. Mostly for all the other people in your life. For the people who've heard this story from friends, acquaintances, co-workers, loved ones, all this stuff, this talk is I'm going to try and explain why these patients feel so rotten. It's designed to try and explain what's going on, why they just hang up on you when you phone at 6 o'clock on a Friday night and say, let's go out dancing tonight. Click. Goodbye. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Why is your loved one all of a sudden behaving differently? She's not the person I married. Okay, so let's understand about the balance system. What do we know about the balance system? People talk about the balance system, but there's a number of complicating factors when we try and understand what it is. It helps me move around. like I'm doing now, stand up like I'm doing now, and keep my balance like I'm doing now, because I'm not leaning on this lectern. How can it make me feel so sick? I mean, it can make me feel off balance. How can it make me feel so sick? Well, general information. The balance system, and I'm not going to throw too many medical or complex words or anything like that. The balance system or the vestibular system is a sensory system. It collects information about stuff going on in our environment. It is not an isolated structure. I can't go down to the morgue and pull one out and show it to you or not. It's not a structure. It is not controllable. You can't control it. It is always active. It's active in me now because I'm standing. It's active in you because you're sitting in your chair. It's active in somebody sitting in a wheelchair. It's active in somebody lying in bed fast asleep. We cannot feel it collecting environmental information. It does its job automatically all the time. Remember, if you're sitting in bed or lying in bed or in a wheelchair, it's working all the time. So that's a very important thing to know. What does this system do? If it's always working, then how come I can't feel it? And how come I can't control it? How come I can't turn it up or down? Well, it is totally different than other sensory systems. Other sensory systems I can control. I can decide to look at something or not look at something, or smell a pretty flower or not smell something, or hear something or not. I can control it. The balance system is a system which I cannot control and cannot turn up or down. It's just the way it works. It cannot be directed towards something or away from something. We can't feel it because the information is not sent to the feeling parts of our brain. Eventually it's copy sent, but I'm not getting into that. So that's the difference. It's a sensory system, but that is the difference between the balance system and all the other systems. So even though it's a sensory system, we don't feel, again, sensory things. Oh, gee, I can really feel that. We don't feel it, as I said, because the information is not sent to those parts of the brain which let us feel stuff. If we put some demands on the system, then we can often see how the system copes with challenges. In other words, we can feel it if we really, really stress it. We can feel it if there is something wrong with it. Go take bicycle or unicycle lessons. I'll go take unicycle lessons or try and work out on the Bosu ball at the gym. Stressing the balance system will show me or let me feel what's going on. And if there's something wrong with it, we can also feel what's going on quite often. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, so the balance system's jobs, the two main jobs, I'm not getting into the anatomy or the neurophysiology or anything, but the two main jobs are the reflexes. A reflex is a word for something your brain or your central nervous system carries out without thinking. The balance system normally doesn't need any help to accomplish these jobs. Because that's a good thing. Because if something happens to the balance, if you are perturbed in your balance, and I come up and push you like that, you can think about what to do and how to stabilize yourself. But by the time you've figured out how to do it, you're on the floor with a fractured hip or whatever. So it's a good thing. It's a well-designed system to work fast right away. So that's the jobs of the balance system. Two main jobs. Job number one, I'm going to throw out a couple of terms here, not too much terminology, but a reflex, as I said, a pathway which I do without thinking. Two main jobs, one of them is to stabilize the body. I'm standing here, I'm moving, whatever, I'm bending over. We have 2 feet, so we are always off balance. We're not like donkeys and goats and horses and pigs. They have 4 feet. We have 2 feet, so we're always dynamically off balance. So it's a pretty darn good thing that it's working all the time. The vestibulospinal reflex, I tell medical students, I only have to teach you half of it. If I tell you the name of a reflex, you can tell me where it comes from and where it goes to. If I tell you where it comes from and where it goes to, you can tell me its name. So the vestibulospinal reflex goes from the balance system down to the spine to stabilize my body. The other reflex is called the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and they are eye drivers. We have a fantastic 3D system since we moved around and became frontal-eyed animals. We can study things in incredible detail if we get them right at the very, very middle of our eye. And we better have a system that does that all the time, because I don't think about what I want to look at. I want to look at here, and then I hear something over here, and then I hear the phone ring, and then I look up here. I have to do this all the time, fast, without thinking. So there's two systems, basically, body stabilizer thingies and eye driver thingies. These things are very easy to describe. I'm not getting into this basic things of dizziness and that. Damage to this reflex can result in vertigo. Vertigo is spinning and spinning and spinning. If you haven't got spinning, you haven't got vertigo in North America. And this is one of the problems here. And we have an international committee which is designed to try and sort of standardize the terms. Not because we're right and they're wrong. It's just we got to know what everybody's talking about. But for all intents and purposes, for today's lecture, vertigo is spinning. And if something goes wrong and the eye movers think that you're turning and you're not, then you can have a problem with vertigo. And also nausea. The reasons for that we're going to get into in a few minutes. We think we're moving when we're not. There is an erroneous signal sent in. This is really easy. You say, well, gee, 25% of the patients in Vancouver don't speak English. How are you going to do that? The patient, I call that the international spinning finger sign, and it's extremely helpful in all the 238 languages of the world. 238 languages? I have no idea. But anyway, it's extremely helpful. So now we can figure out, it's also helpful because I'm not medically qualified, but if you go like that, the only thing in the brain which can make you feel like that is your ear, one ear. So that's very, very helpful right off the bat to understand what can go on. A vestibulospinal reflex deficit. You can stagger around or feel unbalanced. The vestibulospinal reflex is reference to the only thing in our lives which is stable. All the time, all day long, every day. The Canadian dollar isn't stable, the stock market isn't stable, the weather isn't stable. Gravity is stable. It's the only thing in our lives, and that's a good thing. So we are referenced to gravity all day long. Patients with abnormalities such as these are really, really easy to diagnose because they either go like this or they come staggering into the office and hang onto the walls. So there's something wrong with them. We're not going to talk about those folks today. Under normal circumstances, in order to find out what's wrong with a patient or why a patient feels sick or something, we've got to understand how a balance system works under normal circumstances. All information is processed constantly. I've said that 6 times now, so it's probably quite important. We agree that's a good idea. I've said that 4 times. So let's look at a specific situation. The vestibular system is a template against which other information is compared. The vestibular system is the boss, which is good because it's reference to gravity. And any change in this situation suggests to the doctor or to the clinician that there's something wrong. Let's think of a typical idea. I'm sitting at the SkyTrain, at the station. I'm sitting on my SkyTrain, and I'm looking out the window, and there's another SkyTrain there. And then something starts to move. Is it us moving, or is it the other guy moving? I say, oh, come on, you idiot. You can feel yourself moving. It must be you moving. That's correct. If I can feel us moving, then it's us leaving. If I can't feel us moving, but I see some kind of movement, then it's not us moving, because if it was us moving, I'd be able to feel it. So the vestibular system is the boss and helps sort out sensory discrepancies, sort out disagreements between the two systems. Under normal circumstances, that's what happens. You can try that all the time. Try it if you're sitting in a car or sitting on a bus, anything like that. So that's how it works normally. You can now understand that. What happens if there's a disagreement between the signals that were previously in agreement with each other? If we have this agreement, I know what's going on, and I can feel us moving if it's us moving, and I can't feel us moving if it's not us moving. The two systems talk to each other and know what normal stuff feels like. If I have something called a sensory mismatch, in other words, the two signals don't jive with each other, now the brain is eventually going to be alerted to the fact that there's a new feeling. By new feeling, I mean it didn't feel it before. The presence of a sensory mismatch itself can be a generator of symptoms. And we're going to get into how that happens, but it can actually make you feel, not that there's something wrong, but there is a mismatch that has been created. A slight difference between those two things. So, I don't want to get too complicated, but if the balance structure is damaged, its signal is no longer reliable. Don't trust the boss anymore. And it might disagree with the other environmental signals. So, as I said before, this disagreement or this mismatch can induce symptoms because there's something new going on that wasn't going on before. So this is brand new. Oh boy, you and Dr. Keshner figured this out on. This wasn't figured out by us. Back in 1975, which is back in the dinosaur days as far as balance system research is concerned, McCabe described supermarket syndrome. Found that patients with Meniere's disease, and a lot of people here are probably familiar with Meniere's disease, it's a traditional disease which damages the balance system of the inner ear. And patients with Meniere's disease didn't like going grocery shopping anymore. Why? Because when I go grocery shopping at the big store, I have to look them down the shelves to see what paper towels are on sale. And I don't like doing that because it doesn't make me feel very well. So he described this. He sort of threw it out and said, holy smokes, this is something I have heard. Sat down and listened to his patients. So we know that a copy of the mismatch is sent to the nausea centers of the brain. Anybody in here who's had acute spells, spinning and spinning and spinning, you're nauseated and vomiting and that as well. You go to the emergency room. They don't look at you and see if you've got stomach disease because you don't. You've got inner ear balance system disease. A copy of the mismatch, or the signal disagreement, if you'd like, is sent to the nausea centers of the brain. So, you say, Dr. McCabe came along and figured this out in 1975. Holy smokes, that was a long time ago. This was figured out long before then. Paracelsus was somebody who thought that perhaps there was a connection between the balance system and the stomach, and he thought there should be some treatment for it. I just wanted to throw this about Paracelsus. Paracelsus is kind of a funny guy. There was a very, very famous Greek physician in about 5th century whose name was Celsus. And Paracelsus came along and said, well, I've read all this Celsus. He's a brilliant guy, and I'm actually smarter than he is. So I'm going to let everybody know I'm smarter than he is. But if I called myself like Super Celsus or something, it would sound sort of pompous. So I'll call myself Paracelsus, which means as good as Celsus. So he named himself Paracelsus. So it's like me calling myself like Super Keshner or Super Longridge or something like that. But he was sort of a funny guy. But he was interested in things. He said there's a relationship between different symptoms in different places in the body. Let's go way, way back. Soreness of Ephesus. He had a friend who was a potter. And he walked to his friend's house and talked about whatever the Greeks talked about back then, and watched while his friend was making pots on his potter's wheel, going round and round and round. He found out he was bothered by just watching his friend on his potter's wheel with his hands going like this. In addition, in order to get to his friend's house, Soreness had to walk along a river. And he didn't like to see the water flowing like this. This is all documented. The Greeks were incredible. They documented stuff like this back then. They were very, very good at writing things down. He didn't like watching the water flow as he walked to his friend's house. It made him nauseated before he got there. He found out even thinking about going to his friend's house made him feel a little unwell. So it's really, really interesting that all sort of gets put together. So if we're talking about a sensory situation now, we've got to develop a term to describe it. And this is another thing where we're involved with a worldwide committee to try and figure out what terms to use, because people use lots and lots of different terms, and we've agreed that they all mean the same things. Many researchers use different names, as I said. The ones we've introduced here is visual-vestibular mismatch, or VVM. And before you congratulate me on all this research, as I said, all we're doing is listening and reading the writings of the people back in Greece. There are connections to the nausea centers of the brain. They can be activated by this mismatch. a copy, for whatever reason, we'll get some arguments as to why this might be the case, and I could share with you later on if you want, but for whatever reason, a copy of the mismatch is sent to the nausea centers of the brain. And then Soreness found out that he worried and got upset by even thinking about going to his friend's house. So there was something else triggering, something else that the mismatch triggered beside the nausea centers, maybe the anxiety centers of the brain. I'm worried, I really don't want to go, I don't think I'm going to feel very good. And this is something we're going to talk about later on as well. I think I don't have to talk about it because there's some people here who have lived this and felt this. So, what do we got? What's the situation here? I've tried to explain it to you so you'll understand it and all that. Let's go through it. When functioning normally, the vestibular system and a balance system, vestibular system, I use those terms interchangeably. It serves as a default. If there's a sensory disagreement, there's a default. Everything has a boss. If there's two things that disagree, you have to have a boss to make a decision as what's right. And as I said, the vestibular system is a pretty good boss because it's reference to gravity. If the vestibular signal is erroneous or flawed, then you start to use the visual signal. The visual signal becomes the new boss. Now, that's not a bad idea because I can sort of see what's going on in my environment using my vision, but it can create a couple of problems. So that's the situation now. These symptoms are real and legitimate. Vegetative symptoms, in other words, symptoms which cause problems in your stomach, of unilateral disease, nausea, vomiting, sweating are well known. Again, if anybody who's been through a very, very bad spell of spinning and spinning, you're nauseated, you sweat, and you get drenched, and you vomit, and it's horrible and awful. That's well known. Panic sensations and situation avoidance behaviors may also be driven by vestibular dysfunction. I've had 3 spells, and each of them I had when I was in Costco. So I'm never going to Costco again in my life. Ever, ever. I'm not going near that store. It's just, but that's not a nutty thing. That is a sensible thing to come and say to somebody or to yourself. So these symptoms are real, they're legitimate. They're often minimal. Some people have minimal problems, and I think there's some people here, you talk to people who are dizzy, sometimes they don't have much nausea. It doesn't bother them all that much. Sometimes it is a prevailing thing. They can override the traditional symptom. If you have something wrong with your ear, what do you got? Well, you got spinning and spinning. Sometimes people are so sick and nauseated and vomiting, they are almost not aware at all of any of the symptoms of spinning. And also, these panic sensations can also be driven by something wrong with the balance system. So nausea is normal. These panic and anxiety kinds of things are also normal in some people. The symptoms are real. Appearance of this symptom set is an indirect result of balance organ damage. In other words, again, this is splitting hairs. It's not because of the damage. It's because of the disagreement which has been created. They do not represent psychiatric disease. It's not because you're nutty and crazy. Or in addition to being nutty and crazy, you also have something wrong with the balance system. So this is also very helpful to the clinician, to the doctor. If you feel like this, I mean, they rule out other things like funny blood disorders and funny neurological disorders and that, but if there's no other answers, it's quite possible that it suggests something wrong with the balance system. So in the patient with something wrong with them, as I said, the visual information becomes the new gospel. So now visual information will now give an illusion of movement. What symptoms might a patient voice? Let's go through this mismatch situation once again. So I can now explain, and hopefully you can now understand why patients will say this. Shopping malls, 3D movies, traffic going past, what? I can't stand driving in the rain because the windshield wipers are going like this. And driving in the snow is even worse because the snow is coming at me like this. I can't stand the striped shirt. Would you please close your lab coat because I can't stand the striped shirt you're wearing. In all honesty, I sometimes wear a very loud striped shirt to lectures like this. So I say, look, patients don't like this. So now we can account for the bizarre complaints based on the fact that we've got this mismatch between the two signals. Okay, it's not a traditional set. We don't understand it. And these symptoms can be quite upsetting. Okay, it's not the way it's written in the medical books. I don't understand what you got, and I'm really, really smart. I think you probably know that already, but I don't understand it, and it can be quite upsetting. Oh, you burst into tears in my office, eh? How are you feel? Are you feeling okay? Well, no, I'm really depressed. Oh, depression, is that? You're depressed, and that's why you've got dizziness. End of discussion. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I won't show you the anatomical pathways, but one of their esteemed colleagues, Dr. Keshner is my esteemed colleague, she knows him very, very well. He has come and said, look, you guys, it's not the fact that you're depressed and then you get dizzy. You get dizzy and it wrecks your life and you get depressed. And he's an eminent, highly regarded psychiatrist, so he's allowed to say this. So we don't have dizziness-related depression. We have dizziness-related depression, not depression-related dizziness. Again, because I can't stand. I used to go out partying until midnight every night. My friends all thought I was wonderful. Now I'm home at 6 o'clock. I want to put my pajamas on and get into bed. And nobody phoned me. Hear that all the time. So that makes sense. And it's now sort of out there for people and their relatives and their family to understand it. Keep in mind that VVM is a normal life experience. You can go watch it, these 3D full surround movies and that. They're kind of cool. You go, whoa. It's a very real experience. It doesn't cause any damage. It's kind of fun. Watching sports on TV, the action of watching the big hockey game I want to go to the bar and watch it on the big screen TV. That's wicked. Car chase on a movie screen, oh, that's really fantastic. So this is very real stuff that can be sometimes enjoyable. We create the mismatch, and it can be enjoyable at times. So let's review again what happens when something goes wrong. The perception can sometimes be erroneous. The visual system is now the boss. So any movement is now interpreted as self-movement. So I'm sitting in the SkyTrain, or I'm sitting at a hill in my car, and somebody's beside me, and they're trying to beat me at the light. So they start creeping out before the light turns green. Is that them creeping out that way, or is that me rolling backwards? Say, well, it's not you rolling backwards, you idiot. Can you feel yourself rolling backwards? Then it's not. If somebody has something wrong, then they say, well, I didn't know if it was them creeping forward or me creeping back. I didn't know. I couldn't tell. I was putting my foot on the brakes because I thought my brakes had failed. I hear that all the time. So that makes sense. Now you can say, okay, this patient is not nutty. It could be there's something wrong with the balance system because of this new attempt by the system to remedy something wrong. The perception of movement. You're not doing anything. You feel unwell, even though you're sitting in your car doing nothing, and you see this movement. Okay, let's look at some situation-specific scenes. One important thing we said is that the symptoms of the mismatch. Remember the difference between symptoms and signs. And this is one thing that people who with this kind of problem come say, I wish I'd fractured my hip. I wish I'd had a broken leg. Then people would see, oh, gee, you poor thing. How are you doing? But the signs are something inside. I mean, I've got a migraine now. I've got a terrible migraine. It's pounding away. But I smile. I don't have a migraine, by the way. But yeah, I can stand here and smile and look like a nice guy, and you won't know that I feel rotten. So, here's a long bank of escalators. This is from London. This is in London Tube, actually. A person with normal, intact vestibular reflexes might not be bothered by this moving bank of escalators. Moving visual input doesn't bother me. My balance system says, oh, gee, look at those escalators going up and down. One can see, though, in a patient relying on visual information as gospel, this is your new gospel, a patient could well be disoriented, and the VVM could be created. A vague sense of imbalance, nausea, and a panic sensation could be quite debilitating, especially if you're trying to catch the tube or get off the tube in the London subway system. Here we can see the sunlight flicking through the trees, going through a ride on a beautiful, beautiful day. The sunlight flicking through the trees as you're going past. I don't want to go driving. I just want to go driving on cloudy days because I can't stand going driving. I mean, what a beautiful thing to do. Nice fancy car, much fancier than any car I'll ever own. But a nice thing, driving along there, beautiful drive. You can't tolerate it. Here's an example of sensory disagreement. I'm standing here watching a train. Look at this. A train is going past us very, very quickly. But I've got some stable visual objects that I can use to stabilize myself. this sensory disagreement can be dealt with. Because my visual system says, oh God, look at that train going past. But my other visual information says, oh, there's a tree in the background. Oh, there's a railroad crossing sign there. Everything's fine. My vestibular system says, yep, you're just standing here. Visual system says, yep, everything's fine. Train going past in front of me. So it wouldn't really bother me because my balance system is stable and because my vision is trustworthy. How about this? There's nothing strange or unusual about this. I've just gone really, really close to what's probably a little bit too close for safety. But there's nothing unusual about the picture, though. It's still a real-life situation. But now I've eliminated the stable visual input. I've still got my balance system to tell me how I can stand up straight and not fall. But my vision now tells me things are moving really, really fast. If my balance system is working properly, that's fine. Remember, it's the boss. If the balance system isn't working and I'm relying on the visual information, I can see that this would be quite disconcerting. Again, the mismatch is set up even though I am standing absolutely still. So a copy of the mismatch is sent to the nausea centers of the brain. Makes you feel a little bit nauseated. By the way, this is what motion sickness is all about. And a copy is also sent to the anxiety. Oh my God, I don't know. I think I'm going to the anxiety centers of the brain. And there are people in this audience who I should have down here telling us all about this because this is just awful for them. So, in the patient with a balance system problem, we might hear a lot of these things. Again, we've been through this before. I've put it up again. It's actually called shopping mall syndrome or supermarket syndrome. That's the real word for it. The term often used is agoraphobia. Agora is from the Latin word that means marketplace, and agoraphobia was described about the 1860s, and people were afraid of going to open markets with all the people bustling around them. And now, even today, if you go to your doctor and say, oh, I sort of feel funny. I don't like people rushing around me in the open marketplace. Oh, gee, maybe you better talk to somebody about it. You go off to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gets his or her great big huge fat book out and looks up fear of marketplaces and comes up with the term agoraphobia. So now you've got agoraphobia. You've got a diagnosis. Now, there shouldn't be. There is. If John said, look, I'm sorry, I was 15 minutes late for your lecture. I was at my cardiologist today. I say, oh, gee, I hope you're feeling better. I hope things are okay. If John said, no, I'm sorry, I was 15 minutes late. I was at my psychiatrist today. Say, oh, money troubles? Or there's something funny going on? Or just, there is a stigma attached to that. There should not be a stigma, but there is a stigma attached to that. And a very simple study was done by actually one of our colleagues in Sweden. They looked at patients with agoraphobia who diagnosed with agoraphobia, and they had 22 patients diagnosed with agoraphobia, and they did a very, very quick balance test, did head impulse test on them, and 13 of the patients had documented abnormalities of the balance system, which either means that agoraphobia is a psychiatric disturbance which rots the balance system, or perhaps, and I'm not saying, Drew, we're right and they're wrong. I'm just saying that some of these patients might, in fact, have balance system disease, accounting for all their symptoms of anxiety and not wanting to go out anywhere. So it's very, very important to sort this all out, to find out what the heck's going on, and also to make sure there is no stigma. Okay, once the symptoms have been treated symptomatically, how are we going to manage it? First of all, an explanation. You come to my lab and my office and have an appointment with me. We sit and try and explain what the heck is going on. Not because I'm wonderful and smart, but because I just sort of spieled it off before. And also, understanding it can make it feel a lot better. You're not crazy. This is what it is. This is what we understand. This is what's happening. This is the explanation for what's going on. And the best treatment now, which Dr. Keshner and I are working on, the best treatment now is to tell you to go and keep active and things like that. And that's supposed to get you better. It does in a lot of cases. There are some patients who just don't get better. So It's very important to keep active, especially if it makes you all. I tell a stupid joke all the time. The guy goes to a doctor and says, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this. What should I do?" Doctor says, "Don't do that." That is stupid. If you find some activity which makes you feel rotten, and again I sit here, I say, this is easy for me to say, if you find some activity which makes you feel rotten, fabulous. That is step one of your recovery. So we've got to understand, you've got to help us understand where are the symptoms coming from. There's no good tests. There are no good VVM tests. There are no VVM tests at all. You've got to describe their symptoms to you. It's very, very important. Funny little things. It's actually easy because the more people tell us, the more we learn and the more interested we become because they all say the same. We've got groups of patients and we tell patients that. They burst into tears. They go, my story sounds so ridiculous. I said, look, 30 seconds, give me 30 seconds. I could pull the patient's chart and show you the letter. It's exactly the same story you just told me. And Dr. Longridge and I used to laugh. It's all like everybody came down. We see patients from all over BC. It's like everybody got together in a hotel in Kamloops, got the script out in the ballroom, memorized it, and came down and they said the same thing. And our esteemed colleague, Dr. Bronstein, in London, he says, I know where my patients come from. They come from your lab, they drive out to the airport, they fly from Vancouver to London, and they come to my lab. Because they say the same damn thing. Except they say tube instead of SkyTrain, but it's all the... So this is something that is very real, and we have to help you understand it, and also you help us understand it. So, how are we going to deal with it? What do I tell my partner? What do I tell my coworkers? What do I tell my friends? My family's not even going to believe me. First of all, you cannot cause damage by making yourself feel rotten. You can't. There's not many things I can tell you dogmatically for sure. There's a few things we can tell you. Be careful, don't fall, you fracture your hip. That's a different kettle of fish. 20% of hip fractures end up with death from the infection or post-op problems or something. But 20% of people who fracture their hip die. Try and forget it. Okay, that's easy for you to say. You come tell me to try and forget it. If you think about it all the time, it will make it worse. If I think about my sore ankle all the time, it will make it worse. I try and forget about it. And try and maintain my social life. So it'll help me keep active and also perhaps less depressed and upset about it. So, in summary, you've got a real problem. You're not crazy. Thinking about it will make it worse. Don't think about it. Go out and forget about it. Before you punch me in the nose, just listen to me say that. Go out and forget about it. And doing nothing makes it worse. You have to do stuff, whatever it is. There's an unnamed ear, nose, and throat doctor in the Lower Mainland area who tells his patients to go take ballroom dancing lessons. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to see him or her, but he tells you to go and take ballroom dancing lessons. And that actually makes a bit of sense. So this is what we understand about the situation now, and we might have some new information next year. So, in conclusion, that this sounds stupid to say, but I'm going to explain. The diagnosis can be therapeutic. You don't know. A diagnosis is telling you what's wrong. So there's something very wrong with you. There's no good surgical treatments for it. There's no good medicine for it. I believe everything you've told me. It's not going to get worse. You're not going to die of it. Go out and forget about it. So now knowing that, the diagnosis can sometimes make it work, can sometimes be therapeutic. You feel better about it, not because we've done anything magical to you, not because you've read all of Dr. Keschner's research and seen how fantastic she is, but because somebody actually believes you and has sort of charted a course that might help. And hopefully this will help you and all your family and all the support group you've got. And that's basically all I understand about visual vestibular mismatch. Thank you very much.